Hello everybody, welcome back to Steve's Trains. In this video we're going to look at how I installed the Microengineering Code 70 flex track and turnouts on this 1x6 foot HO scale switching layout. Okay, well I've reached the point now where I'm ready to start laying track on this layout. And I've already made some markings here on the layout that kind of indicate where I plan to put the track. Okay, so the black markings here indicate where I plan to have the turnouts located on this layout, and while it is an ingle nook design, which normally would only have 2 turnouts, I do plan to have a third turnout over here servicing another industry here, so it is going to have 1 extra turnout and a little bit more capability for switching operations, but I can basically ignore this turnout over here and just use these 2 turnouts on this side when I plan to operate it as a traditional ingle nook type puzzle switching layout game. Okay, so now I have the baseboard here covered with a nice grayish brown paint. It really looks a lot like concrete actually, the color of it. And so I'll let this dry, come back tomorrow, and I'll go ahead and actually start gluing down the flex track and turnouts in the areas that I want to put them. Okay, so now that I have my track pieces cut to size that I need, and my turnouts here, I'm going to go ahead and solder these 3 turnouts together that I'll be using in this layout project, along with a few short sections of flex track to make one solid unit here. And then I'm going to go ahead and attach all the wires that I'll be needing for the wiring of the layout to this track as well. So I have one unit that's pretty much ready to go. And then the only thing I'll have left to do is to attach the 5 sections of flex track that I'll need, 3 down here, a short one here, and 1 down at this end here. And because there won't be anything attached to those pieces of track, I won't need to do any additional wiring. So basically I'm going to solder wires to the end, to the rails, essentially between each turnout section, as well as to the ends of each turnout section, which will ensure that there's good continuity with the electricity throughout this entire little layout that I'm building here. All right, so I'll go ahead and get all the rail joiners attached that I need to have attached to these little sections of flex track. I'll go ahead and solder those connections, and then I'll go ahead solder on the feeder wires to these sections of tracks. And then when all that's done, it can be pretty much just dropped right in place on the layout once I drill the holes in the proper locations for the feeder wires, and things will be good to go. One nice thing about doing the soldering of all the wires sort of, when it's not on the layout yet, is that I can turn this track over and I can solder feeder wires to the bottoms of the rails, and so you'll never see them once the track is installed. If the track's already installed and you do it to the side, you can make it pretty invisible, especially after it's been painted and ballasted and everything. But obviously, if you do have the wires attached to the very bottoms of the rails, you're never going to see those at all. And so that is one nice thing. It's very easy to do that, obviously, when your track is not installed on the layout yet. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, I just need to get more rail joiners. You can take a little screwdriver and open these up a little bit, and that does make it a little bit easier to install. Just kind of twisting the screwdriver in there a little bit to kind of pry open the end of the rail joiner a bit more. Another issue too is just that the bottom has been bent a little bit. So I'm going to start off getting the tip of the soldering iron nice and tinned. And let's go ahead and start out putting soldering iron on one end of the rail joint I want to solder, and put the solder on the other end. And then just drag it along the joint there. Until it's flowing good. And this is one of those things that might not be obvious if you haven't done this before, but you only want to solder the outside of the rail joints, not the inside, because if you do, you're gonna have to do a lot of filing to make sure this is perfectly smooth and you don't have any derailment issues with the wheels bumping over the top of that solder. And so again, just solder the outside edge where the wheel flanges won't touch. So all those connections are now done. So next I'm going to go ahead and cut a bunch of lengths of wire about the same length. And normally you would use a thinner gauge wire when connecting your track, but because I am going to be soldering to the bottom, I can get away with the bottom of the rails, I can get away with a heavier gauge wire. So the main important thing when you're wiring is to make sure that you keep consistent with where you with what colors you're using on which track. So in this case, I'm going to make sure that the side closest to me when they're right side up is the red wire. The farther side is the black wire. So when I flip it, it's going to be the side away from me is always going to be the red wires, and the side closest to me is always going to be the black wires. And this is stranded wire, so I have to make sure that it's wrapped up nicely, and I'll just be soldering things to the bottom. The easiest way to do that is to first apply the solder to the wire itself. So you have solder on the wire, and then apply the solder to the underside of the track. And then you can, because this way you don't need three hands, all you have to do is touch the wire with the solder to the section of the track with the solder, apply the heat so everything melts together. And so it's a little bit of a sloppy joint there or connection, but because it's underneath, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to ever see that wire. So once I had all the wires soldered onto the bottom of the track and all the rail joiners soldered that I wanted to solder as well, I went ahead and laid the track on top of the layout and marked the locations where I needed to drill holes for the wires to pass through. Also marked the locations where I wanted to cut out the foam for the uncoupling magnets that I was going to use. So I went ahead and did the drilling of the holes first, and then I went ahead and got all the uncoupling magnets I wanted to use out. And since the magnets are about 1/4 inch or so thick, I went ahead and shaved out those areas with a knife where I wanted to have the magnets. I cut the area a lot bigger than what I really needed to have, but again, I was going to go ahead and patch that in later with some spackling compound to kind of level things up. But I went ahead and cleaned everything up, got the wires passed through the holes, and then I was able to play around where I wanted to have the magnets in place. And of course, it's very important with the uncoupling magnets for them to be lined up exactly in the right spot so you'll actually get the cars to uncouple properly. So I tested that out. Then I went ahead and got some hot glue and hot glued the magnets and the metal plate, which kind of enhances the magnetic field, into the foam where I wanted to have them pretty much exactly lined up with the track. I used some foam pins to kind of help secure the magnets in location. This was mostly important for where I had more than one magnet in close proximity, so I needed to make sure they wouldn't shift, you know, where one might get pulled into the other magnet or whatever. So I used some pins to kind of help hold those in place while the glue was drying. And then once everything was dry, I went ahead and got some lightweight spackling compound and went ahead and patched all the holes where I had drilled, as well as the areas where I had put the uncoupling magnets to make a nice smooth surface. And then of course, before everything dried, I put the track back in place where it needed to go. And to secure the track, I just went ahead, took a little bit of hot glue on a putty knife, kind of smeared it on the areas where I wanted to have the track secured, and that pretty much held the track in place right away without it shifting too much at all. And to paint the track, I did use Rust-Oleum Camouflage Brown spray paint, and that's something that's been recommended by Lance Minheim for spray painting this microengineering track. And for the most part, this is just painted on the rails, painted on the ties, and when I go through the ballasting process here later on, I'll actually go through and do some more weathering of the ties themselves to kind of help that detail, you know, kind of stand out a little bit better in terms of the grain of the wood and that kind of thing. But from now, just the brown spray paint, and I'll kind of leave it at that for the time being until I come back to do more track work later on after I've done some more basic scenery work and kind of started to do some of the structure work and everything else. So anyway, that's pretty much it for the track painting side of things until I progress farther along with the layout building process. And on all the turnouts, I did use these Caboose Industries ground throws. These are the HO/N ones, and they have sort of the reduced travel, and they're the spring ones, so they do tend to work pretty well with this microengineering track. If you use the ones that have a longer throw to them, you can actually end up breaking the throw bar on the microengineering turnouts, so you have to be careful with that. But these do work really well. So anyway, to install these, since I do have them in, you know, they're just in the foam, and it doesn't really hold them, anchor them very well. Actually, in all these here, it's kind of hard to tell, but I cut out a section of the foam and glued in a section of fairly thick styrene, so there was kind of something more to sort of anchor it. And then I kind of glued and used a couple small nails to attach it firmly through that styrene. And with the styrene being glued in there very strongly to the foam, it's not really going to go anywhere. And that does provide a better base to these turnouts. If you glue them directly to the foam, they can obviously shift over time, and that can cause problems with the actual control of them. And so using a setup like this, where there's actually a little piece of styrene that they're glued and nailed to, that does work a little bit better in terms of the overall operation of the turnout. You could use a little block of wood or something like that, but if you are going to use a sheet foam type of decking for your layout, you do need something more rigid to attach these ground throws to if you do want to have reliable operation going forward. For now, everything is just controlled using a handheld battery-powered DC controller, which is connected to the front of the layout using a telephone jack and telephone cord. So just a very simple setup, and all the wires are connected to that jack on the bottom side of the layout. So with the 7 sets of feeders that I have in place, plus all the connections soldered, everything should hopefully be pretty good from an electrical standpoint. We can go ahead and I'll do a little test run here, and you can kind of see how things are operating. Okay, so now that I have the track installed, painted, wired, I'll be moving on to some other projects in upcoming videos, including ballasting the track, adding a road, doing some other basic scenery work such as adding drainage ditches and things like that, and kind of getting things ready to add structures. So we'll look at that in upcoming videos. But anyway, thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next video.